Okay, let's get right back to it. And we're going over to somewhere in Asia. Talk to our colleague and friend Yoichi Shamatsu, who has been with us for, well, quite a long time now, almost since this whole thing began. Are you there, Yoichi?
Yeah, well, there happens to be Bangkok. Just got in out of Fukushima, out of Japan.
How does it feel to have left Japan this time?
Well, actually left me quite exhausted. You know, this whole, besides all the exercise of walking around every day, 15, 20, 25 kilometers a day out there and very 90-degree heat. There's been a heat wave out there, and that's not isolated from what's been happening in Fukushima, the releases from there. And just generally feeling that you're coming down from feeling like your body's been microwaved, that you're being cooked from the inside out. So, it'll be good to detox for a while to try to shake that woozy feeling that overcomes you after a while. You can resist it for a while, but inevitably it starts to drag you down. So it's good to be out. But, last week I was hoping we could connect. At the time, I was sitting in a former village that had been wiped out by the tsunami. And I purposely walked inland a bit to be near a rail line where we know there's mobile service. There were 2 towers in sight and all that, and no call comes through.
Uh-huh.
And this is not unusual. I've been further into the interior a week earlier. I expected a call from a friend in Europe. That didn't come through. So whenever I'm near the Fukushima zone, and I mean not just the exclusion zone, not just that 20-kilometer zone, but a vast strategic area, so the Los Alamos of Japan, stretching from the sea coast into the deep interior mountains. No phone service deliberately.
At least not for you. That's the point.
Yeah, and mobile phone service couldn't figure it out either, how or why they did it. Why, we know why they did it. And, but basically, what we're seeing is that, there's a 10-kilometer space between Fukushima 1 and 2. Former village of Tomioka is there. It's probably going to be used as a nuclear dump site, given the amount of very hot material they're coming up with. And then this whole zone stretches interior to way outside the exclusion zone. And locals have told me about, and this has been going on for decades. People don't like to go to the mountains because suddenly you make a wrong turn and a bunch of guys come out. They accost you, turn you back without explanation, and if you try to press on, they'll threaten you and so on, with detention and all that. So many secret sites out there, and
in that whole
happened to me in the town of Hirona, where secret police had waylaid me there. In fact, the day before that your call was supposed to come in.
Huh. All right. The idea that Japan has not been significantly harmed by the radiation from Fukushima is one that a number of Japanese still hold, unfortunately. Now, there are large demonstrations, we know that, but the denial factor is still present and certainly significant. It's not gone away as fast as we'd like it to see. One man was tested in Fukushima, in the area of Fukushima, I think Fukushima City, and he came up with 20,000 becquerels in his body.
That's not surprising.
That's not good.
Surprising.
Now, how much of Honshu, in your estimation, has been significantly substantially
it's not my estimate. In fact, on this last trip, I had traveled throughout the island to the very southernmost part of the mainland, the very tip of the mainland, down in Kyushu, in the southern point. First, obviously the Fukushima area, there's places that have been sanitized by work crews, but other hot spots, for example, town of Hirono, right there on the border of Fukushima, too, right near Jay Village, where all the workers are staying, this former sports soccer and basketball complex where there's all the worker prefab housing, that little trailer park sort of.
Right.
It's not so little. There's thousands of people staying there as well, outdoor toilets and all. Very primitive, I thought. I was very surprised that they couldn't do better. And there's a lot of contractor villages. Anyways, there's the southern gate of Fukushima 2. I measured a 0.78, nearly one millisievert right there on that spot, which sort of belied their comments that all the radiation came from Fukushima 1. That could not have been possible to have a site like this. I walked around with his old resident whose house had been destroyed by the earthquake. He told me, well, this is the .48 corner. Everyone calls it the 48 microsievert corner, okay? Then as I was leaving town, this is after, some secret police guy jumped out of a car, accosted me, asked me what I was doing there, if I was doing interviews, and, my immediate response would have been, had I been more younger and more naive, would have, who the hell are you to ask? But my answer to him was, well, what interviews? There's nobody here to interview. This is a ghost town. Either everyone is left or they're dead, okay? Right. And he says, well, if you want, he says, then what are you doing standing around? Well, I'm taking a picture of this roadside statue of a Buddha. It is very interesting. That sort of threw him off. And he said, next time, he says, if you want to do interviews, you got to go to the city hall, register there, and bring your ID along. And I said, well, that's very good. That means next time I come here, I'll know what to do. I'll go exactly straight to the town hall so I can do my interviews. He says, what do you mean you're coming back? I said, well, thanks to you, I know what to do now. I'm going to come back and do some interviews. Thank you. Well, he left after that, very flustered. But on the town, I was the only guy walking around this whole area. The town adjoining Fukushima, too. I was the only person out and walking around. No one else dares walk outside there. And then so they make this PA address, public address, I guess just for me, saying, well, we've just registered this morning. We've done measurements, 0.24 microsieverts. There's 24 microsieverts, essentially. And then I said, oh, that's very funny, because right here where I'm standing, it's 34. It's 10 points above. So obviously the government's underplaying the effort. To make a long story short, I checked the mountains just northwest of Tokyo, okay, where some of the water into Tokyo comes in.
Yes.
There was a high-pressure zone, which from the Pacific had been pushing moisture from the Pacific Trench over Japan into Korea, China, and so on. And on a saddle between two peaks, and this is at 1,000-meter high, 1,100 meters high, 2,000 feet, and a little more, about 300 feet high. I got registers of 28 microsieverts up to about 40 microsieverts, which is unheard of, just moisture in the air. So it's drifting in over the Pacific. And in the far distance, you can see those illuminated clouds that I talked about drifting in from the Pacific Trench.
So this moisture,
Kyushu, high readings also, higher up, about 1,200 meters. Bottom of the clouds, I was getting something like 0.28. That's very, very far from the trench, very far south of Fukushima. Still a lot of radiation atmospheric. And this accounts for all the deaths there from the so-called heat waves. These are heart attacks. These aren't heat-caused deaths. These are heart attacks from the radiation that's wafting in.
Now, this moisture is coming from the water off eastern Japan. That's correct.
A lot of the solid material that they dumped out of Fukushima and that was washed away by the tsunami settles down in the trench, concentrates there, and that's where clouds form. And you can see it on the horizon, this sort of dirty gray spot. And then when it gets very excited at times, these very colorful clouds arise, these very tall. And then, generally they're blowing toward the United States. But whenever there's a Pacific high, they'll come into Japan. I was there when there was a Pacific high typhoon, and the typhoon really drove it into southern Japan, South Korea, in fact, right into China, into the Beijing area. So, there was a lot of radiation that typhoon number 15 forced in. I also stopped in Taipei, Taiwan, northern part of Taiwan. Not too high the readings there, because a different typhoon had come from the south and cleared the air. But in the flight in between, there was massive radiation, in 30,000-foot range where the plane was flying.
There is even in the Sea of Japan, the waters are showing much higher radiation than is normal.
Yeah, that's a condensation. It's a cooler area than the Pacific, so condensation occurs there, dropping down. So basically, all the seafood in Korea is not too good. And speaking of seafood, the fishermen there told me readings off of south of the plants there. They've been pole fishing, sending samples to the lab. Bottom feeders heavily irradiated. One type of rockfish was registering 1,700 becquerels. And the study was somewhat flawed because they didn't have to weight or estimate the age of the fish. There's a lot of things that you would have to input, flesh versus bone versus skin and all that. But indicates that the area still remains quite hot, that a lot of fish are irradiated. In fact, all the fish are irradiated. It's a matter of degree of what you consider a safe level there.
Right. The debate, the debate continues. Now, there are of course still reports of massive amounts of radioactive hot water being dumped. I guess TEPCO admitted to 1,000 tons a day being dumped into the Pacific continually, but that's the admitted level.
Yeah.
Now, the idea of fish...
I talked to a middle
ahead.
manager that was one of the general contractors. He says there are many sites there. 1 millisievert sites, especially turbine rooms, and they're just digging these things out, stuffing all the metal, the pipes, the dirt, the gravel, concrete, and into 40-foot container-sized caskets because they have nowhere to go with these things. So they're just stacking them up. They're just because
and these are all 1 millisievert. The annual dose is supposed to be
1 sievert. You stand next to that site for 5 hours.
1 sievert. I gotcha. I didn't think it was 1 millisievert.
Between 400 millisievert and 1 sievert. Okay, the 400 stuff is the less contaminated. I mean, you stand next to that stuff, for half a day, you're dead. So yeah, very toxic stuff. You have many sites, being kept secret. They got to wash them down so people can work near there. And then they're just calling because it's incredible. He says the amount of radiation there is incredible. That the workers who are there very much brutalized. They show any sign of illness, they're immediately fired, kicked out of the area, sent home. Within a week or so, they run out of money. A lot of them have committed suicide. Most of the workers are from Okinawa, the former colonial areas of Japan. The frontier is sort of like the Wild West of Japan. Okinawa and Hokkaido, where there's still a lot of poor people. Usually these guys work on cleaning up oil tankers.
Mm-hmm.
So they use the toxic work, but they're surprised when they get to Fukushima and find out their teeth are falling out and so on. There are also many workers from Niigata from the 2007 earthquake out there who had worked on patching up the TEPCO reactor out there. They come in too. So those 3 areas. He says not too many locals will work there because the locals are very, very familiar with the radioactivity and know that it's deadly. And,
is the
blue bags all over the Hirono town, which is kind of a Potemkin village now, which they're trying to tear down all the earthquake-torn buildings, older buildings, and erect brand new buildings they're erecting there. It's a real Potemkin village. There's so-called decontamination going on, and trash is handled in 2 ways. Some of the stuff that goes on open dump trucks, those are buildings that are not contaminated, but when you see these huge blue bags, flat bags covered with blue tarps, I took reading of one of them. That was that was basically 60 microsieverts, so highly radioactive. Just sitting there on the corner waiting to pick up.
How about the Yoichi?
Massive amount of radiation everywhere. Yeah.
Okay, the general food supply for Japanese people now. How compromised is it, in your opinion? What are you reading? What are you hearing from others over there, scientists? Now, we've seen another story just the other day from a Japanese professor of nuclear engineering. They're coming forward and talking about the penetration of the food supply. It's coming up in the rice. It's coming up in the fruit crops. It's coming up, of course, obviously in the fish that are caught. Tell me more about it.
Yeah. Well, the problem is that the government's going with a low reading and using it as a general reading. That there's a whole scale of, like in fish, for example, there's a whole range of fish, and what types of water, what's their migratory pattern, what do they feed on. All that data is yet to be done. The fishermen are the only ones doing it. The government's not really doing much with the data. There's no attempt to really analyze what it means, what parts of the fish, and how can some fish be caught before they reach some of these radioactive feedings. All that stuff needs to be done. It's not being done. Rice, the farmers get around by just polishing it down more. So you see smaller rice in Japan.
Is that it? That's interesting. So they polish the rice down to a smaller kernel size, and they get a better reading on it. How interesting.
That's the way. What they're doing with the scrap rice, who knows? A lot of Chinese tourists, and now they're trying to attract tourists from Malaysia, Muslims, consuming a lot of this dangerous materials. So they figured, well, the government figures they got to dump it to sell it to somebody, all this food, and then these guys would be here for only a week or two, so just let them gorge on this radioactive food. And then, unfortunately, the attitude of the Chinese is that their food supply is so contaminated. What's the problem of going to Japan? It couldn't be any worse. Well,
Wow.
the bad news for them, it is worse. And,
Wow. Yeah.
So the super low prices are being offered to them on these super low tours. So it's kind of a very inhumane, cruel thing to do.
It is.
To reel in people who've been so isolated and come from a country that has food safety problems, and then to dump all your radioactive food on them. It's like something very horrific. I mean, it's something very inhumane going on.
Speak, if you can, a little
in fact,
closer.
It's kind of an act of war. It's an act of war, if anything.
Well, it is. Talk a little louder talk a little louder in the phone, Yoichi, just a bit if you can.
Okay.
There we go.
All right. Yeah, we have there's always a bad line here.
It's fair. It's okay.
All right.
The efforts of the average Japanese to get a real, honest reading on the danger they face are hampered the same way we are over here by a government that is not going to tell them. And what they're relying on are independents and various people from the academic community who have come forward, who are trying to do honest readings and spread the word. But there is, as I talked to Richard Wilcox a couple of months ago, he's living over there with a family, been on the program a number of times, and I asked him, Richard, how many people in Japan really understand what's going on in terms of the environmental damage, the toxicity in the food, land, air, water, and everything? He said about 1%. That's all that know. He said they really don't know. They may be conservative on that.
Fear. There's a lot of fear. But
so they don't want to know. That's right.
Yeah, they don't have any real.
Well, we would do the same here. People are people.
Yeah. Well, I think in the United States, you got to understand, when I was in Milwaukee, the sort of the headquarters for all the work at Fukushima 1 and 2, there were a lot of workers, American workers from GE there on the streets. You know, a lot of bars there. You do a lot of drinking to take their mind off the problems of being contaminated. Apparently, I saw some people who look like DOE, government people there, Americans. So Americans are neck deep in this, and what they're neck deep in is Japan's nuclear program. America, the George Bush administration, and perhaps even before that, they've been supporting Japan's nuclear bomb program. And these sites that we're talking about, it goes back many, many decades to hydro plants like the ones in Norway. You have to understand that Fukushima, a lot of the mountains there are created by uplift. So it's the only part of Japan with uranium. And if you build dams there, if there are lakes there, the water will become irradiated and it will create tritium. Tritium is like deuterium. It's basically water would have two neutrons, and it's very necessary to make hydrogen bombs to explode plutonium and make uranium bombs explode more efficiently. And so this tritium extraction process has been going on there a long time. There's no way that the American government could not have noticed that. In fact, probably supported it all along. And this is explains all these strange quasi-nuclear, they were these strange new nuclear reactions we saw at Fukushima and the explosions. Remember all the scary sort of bluish lights and flashes? Well, when tritium goes up like that, it'll be, the meltdowns will trigger the neutron bombardment of tritium. It will then release neutrons, but it will also split the water molecules into supercharged isotopes, which then will recombine and then will release, basically creates a very strong electromagnetic field and electrical field, which will then cause a lot of this sort of lightning, these flashes of light. So tritium is sort of the missing element, which explains the nature of the explosions that we saw. They're not hydrogen explosions. These are tritium-enabled explosions in the steam out of the reactors. So they're not doing that with the dams now, I don't believe, because you can make it nuclear reactors. But obviously, reactor 3 probably was used in tritium production also. So this is a part of the missing puzzle, and why the American people and the Japanese people do not know what's going on. It's all about weapons production. Illegal. If it ever really comes out and either government really admits to it, that's the end of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. It's the end of the U.S.-Japan Security Treaty. Basically nullifies all the treaties. basically it'll make shambles of America's effort to rein in Iran, North Korea's nuclear programs also. And there is a massive double standard here. When we have a massive site this large, this extensive, operated this long, with American technicians and engineers over there, American support over there, it's going to be very, very tough for the United States to be pointing fingers at Iran or North Korea, which have much smaller programs.
We have, unfortunately, a curve that is going the wrong way. The accumulation of radioactive isotopes, again, in the ground and the water and the fish and the animals, is not stopping. It's only increasing, and it's going to continue that way. There's just no reversing it. We even have now found increased levels. Now, these are small. They're not dangerous, but they're increased levels in pine needles all up and down the West Coast. Certainly in crops, they found increased levels in prunes recently. The food supply here has been clearly impacted. Is it dangerous to eat? Not yet, but things are only going to continue to compound and get worse. It is said within the next 3 to 4 years, the waters off the coast here are going to be heavily contaminated with the cesium twins and other heavy isotopes. So it's not a good situation, and we're just not getting anything at all from the government here. Nothing. No reading, no programs,
well,
no testing,
real threats in the upper atmosphere. We talked about these strange weather that's happened in the United States this year. Now a massive drought. As I told you, as I flew over, massive amount of contamination in the upper atmosphere, changing weather patterns. We may see a lot of the United States, North America, turn into a desert. We may see the depopulation of Scandinavia, where there's basically no more water left. This is causing massive things going on. Could only have happened. These levels only have had if weapons grade uranium were involved. The bomb has backfired, and I think on the anniversary of Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombing, the chickens are coming home to roost in the United States of America.
So far to date, Japan has dropped 168, at least, Hiroshima-grade bombs on itself with this disaster.
Yeah, and it's all drifting across the Pacific in both directions.
Yoichi, thank you for being here. Talk to you next week. Be well. Detox and enjoy.
All right. Okay.
Okay, good night. Yoichi Shamatsu in Bangkok, Thailand, trying to detox from his time in the Fukushima area in Japan again. One of the world's most accomplished environmental reporters. Remarkable to have him on the program each week. Do your research, do your studying, stay informed. We'll do our best to help as we can. Good night. Talk to you tomorrow.